Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
And my name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go into a movie that I was going to say something brilliant, but I didn't. I stopped.
Before we get into the movie, I did want to, we're actually recording on Veterans Day, and I did want to just, quickly say something about Veterans Day and I wanted to thank all the people who've actually been in the armed services, and I just know that that's a huge sacrifice. And, I know you have family that are either have been in the armed services or are currently in the armed services, and me too. And I just know that it's a big deal, and it's definitely appreciated, and it's definitely a sacrifice, not only for the people who are in the military, but also for their families too. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, that's nice. I'm glad that you did that. Yeah, my father was in the Navy for 26 years. My brother is a brigadier general in the Air Force.
Wow.
Yes, and my nephew, he's in the military too. Yeah, so it's a sacrifice, and it's amazing. And the biggest sacrifice, being a family member, it affects you, but not really, not directly me. But I do realize, and I do take a moment to be grateful, because I think it takes a mental fortitude that I don't have. I don't have it. I mean, I guess if I had to do it, I could do it, but there's nothing about me that says I would want to do it. So I'm glad people do it.
Yeah, me too. And yeah, I mean, my dad was in the military, and my grandpa also. So yeah, and I just think that it's something that is it's something it's selfless in a lot of ways, and we have very few things in this world that are as selfless as that. So that being said, I'm going to make a very clunky transition into the movie we're going to talk about today, The Eternals, or I'm sorry, Eternals. And it's about people who are also protecting other people, except these particular humanoids are not actually human. They're ancient aliens, and they've been here the whole time. Spoiler alert. And so, yeah, moving forward in the MCU, it's technically not the first movie in phase 4 of the MCU, but it's trying to get us past the Infinity Saga and trying to get us past Infinity War and Endgame and all of the Avenger stuff, and trying to move us forward. But I think for me, that was the biggest thing that it was fighting against. And the main thing that you're comparing it to, or that I was comparing it to, and it puts it at a disadvantage. It puts this movie at a disadvantage. I know it's easy to say, oh man, Eternals is horrible, I hate it, but I think that that's kind of like a weak position. I think that you should have a clear understanding as to what you don't like about the movie before you come in and say it sucked. So I'm going to try to be very specific about the things that I enjoyed and the things that I didn't like about it. And I know you will too, but just initially, what was your feeling going into it? And then how did you feel walking out of the movie?
Well, I'm sort of proud of us, because we do take that approach to most movies, that we try to figure out what we liked about it and what the positive aspects of the film are before we start bashing it. And it's all based on the theory that we do absolutely nothing but pay our money and sit in the dark theater. Yes, that is a valid part of the process, and that is a valid part of the trinity of screenplay, movie, or actor and audience. So I'm glad we approach things this way. And I will approach this movie this way, but I do have a lot of questions about certain choices. At first, well, so good things. I didn't think it was as hard to follow as I expected it was going to be. She made it very clear, and the screenwriters made it very clear what the powers of the Eternals are, and so that was good. And then they utilized them in battles or whatever was happening in the proper way to get you to understand what they can actually do and how they can work as a team together. So my initial reactions to the actual idea of this was okay, yeah, another superhero movie. I'm cool. I didn't do much research into the Eternals because I wanted to know what it was like to actually just come fresh-faced to something. And having such a comic book background and being so much into superheroes, that's really impossible for me, because it's always a monster. Something's always that threat. And it's usually terraforming, and they usually have to join together to defeat whatever's terraforming the Earth to change it into their environment. This is a little bit different because it spans thousands of years and centuries. And so it was a good experience to learn something new and a new concept. It, of course, doesn't really feel like a Marvel movie, but I think that's okay. I wasn't bringing any of that baggage into it. But I will say this, I have been trying to poke holes in it, not consciously, but like I start to think about it, I was like, yeah, well, okay, that worked. But what about this? Oh no, that worked. And so I have thought a lot about it, and it hasn't fallen apart completely.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to actually become more solid as I was leaving the theater. And that's where you can always tell when you're paying your ticket to the little parking deck and you're like, okay, that's starting to fall apart for me immediately. Then you know that you have something that you have a lot of questions about. So I thought overall, I kind of want to see it again. I kind of can't wait to see it again. I mean, there's a
Mm.
ton of things to see, and my goodness, am I
Yeah.
addicted to the streaming services that I have right now. So I don't know about that, but I am interested to try to figure out what I might not understand that might be answered on a second watch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's where, for me at least, YouTube really fills that gap in that there are so many explainer videos out there, and Easter eggs you might have missed from the Eternals, and they talk about why this was that and why this means something and what this is setting up for the next movies and all of that. And I think that's kind of like, I don't have a problem with that. I can understand uh, people's frustration with a film where you have to, number one, know a bunch of stuff about what's happening before you even get to the movie, and number two, you have to know that this movie is not in itself an island, and that it's setting up something that's going to happen in the future. Really, as far as this movie is concerned, there was not much of a prerequisite for this movie. There was only the fact that people that were in this movie, in the present day of this movie, knew that there were superheroes and knew that the blip happened and the snap and all that stuff. Like they understood that this was going on. And so we were essentially right there with them. But as far as like backstory is concerned, all of that's given to you in this movie. And whether you like it or not, it's given to you. And I think that this movie suffers from the issue that you have so many characters. There are 10 Eternals, and it's not unprecedented. Even in MCU movies, there's way more than 10 people associated with Infinity War and Endgame. But we've had 18 movies before that to like get us set up for that. So that right there is kind of not fair to do a direct comparison between Infinity War and this movie, for example. So it's not fair, but it's still, we're still grading on the same scorecard that we were with Infinity War and with Endgame. So that already puts Eternals at a disadvantage. And I think also the fact that it has a lot of parallels with Guardians of the Galaxy, and I think that it runs the same risks that Guardians of the Galaxy ran with, is that these are all kinds of people we don't know. They're all going to be shoved together, and we're going to have to feel the dangers and the stakes and the risks that all these people are taking, and we're going to have to understand their dynamics. But with Guardians of the Galaxy, we were kind of like watching a group form. And even with Guardians of the Galaxy 2, the second one, which actually has a lot more in parallel with this movie, there's still, number one, there's less of them. And number two, we still kind of understand where each of them fit. In this movie, they have to spend a lot of time trying to give each of the characters enough time on screen, and I ultimately don't think that they gave them enough time on screen, even though this movie is 2 hours and 45 minutes long, and I didn't feel like it was long. I feel like that is a credit to the editing of the movie, and I feel like the fact that we didn't just sit there and be like, oh my gosh, there's another battle scene. Like, for me at least, I didn't feel that, but I also felt like there were certain things in the movie that were super rushed. A lot of the relationships were very rushed, and I don't think that a lot of the characters had time to establish themselves as what they were. And I mean, we can start getting into spoilers here pretty soon, but there's certain characters that I think it would have helped us to have a little bit more backstory to understand them before what happened in the movie happened. and I just it was difficult for me to really connect with some of the characters, well, with all the characters pretty much, and to understand when someone's in danger, like what kind of danger are they in? Like these are beings that are not human, but they have the potential to die, but then they're also like, have all these superpowers. And so it's just it's hard to figure out like what the stakes are in this movie. And so those are some of the very generic complaints that I guess that I have with the movie. But I do think that the movie, the way that it was shot, was beautiful, and it didn't look anything like any other Marvel movie that I've seen. I think that the fact that they used a lot of natural light and the lens choices that they used, those things were surprising to me. And I don't know why, because I mean we saw Nomadland and we knew it was beautiful. And I wrote down like, Malick-esque. This movie is like a Terrence Malick movie. But then I put down right next to it like Zhao-esque, because why not?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we've seen her do this before. So why would we expect anything different? So those are some bright spots in the film. The cinematographer is a little bit different than the cinematographer that she used. His name's Ben Davis, and he's shot Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers Age of Ultron, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel. He's worked with Matthew Vaughn and Martin McDonagh. But all of the movies that he shot, they don't look like this. And so I think that the collaboration of those two, I think, made this movie look like it looked. And I think that the movie is better for it.
Well, I like your Guardians of the Galaxy comparison because I think you're right to a degree. The thing about Guardians of the Galaxy is that it kind of centralized on one character. And it was a character that we could instantaneously relate to, fish out of water. And, you learn very much about that character throughout the first two movies. But it's really Chris Pratt's movie and then the rest of the Guardians. And then as they come along and as he starts to get the crush on Gamora and all of that starts to happen, and then, Groot and Dax, what's his name? Dax?
Drax.
They start to exhibit personality traits. So, and there's what, 5 of them? So yeah, it's a little bit different. I don't know about that though. I don't know about, I didn't feel exactly separated, like you were saying, from some of the character development. I thought that they did fairly well with explaining why Sprite acted the way that she did. And Druig, I believe is his name, Barry Keoghan, they alluded to things, but the question I have is that you finally get it established and then they switch it. They bait and switch you. And then is that a bad guy or a good guy? Now, is he against the Eternals or is he with the Eternals, but he's got his own separate cause, in particular Druig. So it's too much at one time to take it all in. I think they needed to simplify it. And that's my very first question. See, I did some research and I don't know much about these characters. So I didn't do a whole lot of research, as in only Wikipedia. And I found a few things out that I understand why they did things different in the movie. Most of the Eternals have all of those powers, according to Wikipedia. They can all heal themselves. They can all fly. They can all do these things but so they individualized the power. I guess Chloe Zhao and the screenwriters. And there's 2 other screenwriters. And then Jack Kirby is credited also because he created the characters. So I understand that. And then they did that Doctor Strange thing with how they exhibit their powers, with wraps around the wrists or the wraps around the fingers to be guns, and then the laser. And I was super surprised that they put that Superman reference in there, but they almost had to. They had to, Okay, spoilers from this point on. This is a fun movie. It's worth seeing. It is a beautifully shot movie. See it in the theaters, in my opinion, if you feel safe. If not, it's coming soon. I definitely think it's worth watching. And I also think, 1, it's made a lot more money than I expected it to. So it's going to be fine. And 2, it's going to develop a cult following, and then it's going to get huge. That's just how it works with these type of movies. The movie is ultimately very interesting and very well put together and is at its core good storytelling. So people will attach themselves to it in the future. That said, my first question was, why so convoluted with all of the storylines in the first movie? They needed to simplify it, bring it back to why this affected Icarus, or why this affected Sprite, and how that affected Ajax and Athena, and all of the how did they needed to simplify it. But then, in order to understand the past history of why they've been around, they had to take you back to Mesopotamia. They had to take you back
Yep.
to India, and it just started to be like, whoa, bring it back down, bring it back down. And then they do that ultimate thing at the end of the film where a couple characters just like, I gotta go, just because there are too many characters to fight the final
Yep.
battle. But you're disappointed with the character that has to go. It's like that
Yeah.
character, first of all, has got a great power, you know? And what
Yeah.
is
Kengo.
Kango, right?
Kumail Nanjiani is the actor.
Who's really great. And I always have to look at his
Amazing,
name in
yeah.
order to pronounce it. He just brings a spark to it. He brings a Chris Pratt attitude to it, but in his own sensibility. And so I took it all in. I understood it, but I don't want to work that hard to figure out everything I'm supposed to know, to remember it just in case it's going to come back, and then it comes back in weird ways. In particular, what happens with Druig? I was like, wait, what? I understood that he was upset and understood why he was upset, but then you finally figure out where he's at and they have to use him again, or they need him again. So they go to his little Children of the Corn village. And
Yeah.
I mean, right? Which is cool, but immediately it gets destroyed by the deviants, which was it purposeful to go back to that, to have that battle scene? Or did we just go get him and say, we need you? Like, why did we need all of that? That said, I did enjoy most of the battles. I did enjoy most of the fight sequences. I did enjoy their interpretation of how they use their powers. I enjoyed all of that. I am a little, I was going to say over it, but I guess that's unfair to this movie. And I don't do the comparison like you were saying. I don't fall into the Marvel movies are this, so this should be this. That doesn't affect me at all. But is it always some giant, omnipotent character in space that doesn't speak, but with this voice, and his mouth doesn't move, and he's got 5 eyeballs? It's like always that guy. And I know that that's comic books.
Yeah, well, I mean, they teased that in the first Guardians of the Galaxy. They talked about Celestials, and they talked
Right.
about what the Celestials were.
Right.
And then, obviously, in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, you find out that Ego is a Celestial, even though he's a different kind of Celestial than the other Celestials in this movie. And so there's obviously precedent for it in previous MCU movies. But really, ultimately, what you're talking about is in this Marvel universe. I'm not even talking about the MCU. I'm just talking about the universe in which Marvel stories happen. This is the creator of this universe, this initial being. And so, that's the mythology of that universe. It happens to share almost everything with our current Earth, as far as somebody wrote Superman, and I mean, everybody has iPhones, and it's just like, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of like an alternate universe, but at the same time, it's a totally different origin story for not only Earth, but also the whole universe. And this movie spends the first half keeping the main characters in the dark about the purpose of the Celestials and the universe, and keeping the audience in the dark, and then switching it up at the end. So it in a sense is a bait and switch movie, and that also hurts the capabilities of the movie. Not only are we being introduced to all these characters, we're also being introduced to characters who are being duped for most of the movie. And
Right.
then they find out the real thing, and then they have to reevaluate. And so like we have to be on board with them at the end, and we have to be evaluating at a much faster speed as them, because they've had 7,000 years to live like this and to evaluate things, whereas we've had 2 hours. So it's a totally different ask for us. And so that's the hard part. I mean, every other Marvel movie that hasn't been an omnibus movie, that hasn't been a, Captain America Civil War or Avengers movie, has allowed the space for origin stories, or even if it's not origin stories, even the Spider-Man movies, even if it's just a stretching of the character a little bit, but we're trying to like we're trying to get all of that in this one movie. And it's a hard thing to ask of the script writers and of the people who are on screen, displaying it. It's hard for me to figure out a way for them to do it better other than to break it up into multiple movies. But I think rightfully so, they understood that they weren't going to be able to do that. Like, we just, as audiences, don't have that kind of patience. And I'm also wondering if, as audiences, what our patience is for these types of dense stories. Like, is everybody here for it? And does everybody just like internalize all of this information about the deviants and the Eternals and the Celestials and understand the relationships between all of them and their relationships to Earth and other planets? Or do they just kind of like gloss over and their eyes just kind of go glossy and they're just like, sure. I just want to see some people beating each other up. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, I geek out on a lot of that stuff and I don't even read the comics, but I just don't know. At some point, when is this comic book stuff? Because we're starting to get real deep into this. When is this comic book stuff gonna become too heavy of a weight to lift for mass audiences? I don't know.
Well, let me backtrack really quick. Richard Madden as Icarus, they had to make that Superman reference because, my goodness, I couldn't stop thinking about, well, he'd be a good replacement for Superman. I thought about it many times, and it didn't necessarily have to do with his powers, although his powers are very similar to Superman.
Very similar.
But he also looks like what we think Superman looks like on film. So when they put that in there, I was like, yes. And it was nice to acknowledge that there are other worlds. And it also reminded me that the Justice League was at a disadvantage from get-go, introducing all these characters that we didn't know anything about. I mean, of course I do, but most people
Wait,
didn't.
hold on a second. Do you think that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Superman is real? Or do you think he's a comic book character?
No, I think he's real.
Really?
Why were they saying that he was just a comic book character?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's DC and this is Marvel. So they're two totally separate companies. Has there ever been a Superman versus Wolverine?
Yep,
Seriously?
absolutely. Yeah, there's been crossovers.
No way.
Absolutely. There are Justice League Avenger crossovers.
No, I didn't know that.
I don't know specifically if that's true, but there's look it up. Oh yeah, there's crossovers.
Okay.
Not all the time.
Okay. All right. So in this world, there is a real Superman.
That's what I thought.
He just happens to hang out in Metropolis.
That's what I thought. I assumed.
And half the people in Metropolis died when Thanos snapped his fingers.
That's what I assumed, because if he was just a comic book character, why didn't they say that? Why didn't the kid be like, hey, look, see my comic book? In the comics, this is what Superman does. But he says something, I saw you on the news and you look just like Superman. So how does he know what, I mean, other than the comics?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I assumed it was a comic thing, but maybe not. I don't know.
I thought it was brave, and I thought it was, let's give each other a break. Stop comparing the two juggernauts. Sure. Let's just, let them exist in the way, because DC's catching up and Marvel is slowing down a little bit, according to everything that I'm reading. So anyway, here's another thing. Going back to the cinematography and going back to Chloe Zhao's choices and the naturalistic light and the, what do they call it? The golden hour? What do they call it? Okay.
Golden hour, yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I love everything about it. I think it's beautiful. But I have two questions about that. Did it serve the story? And you were talking about kind of being burnt out and being hit over the head. These are my words, not yours. With these 10 new characters, and have we had enough? And can we take it all in? Isn't it just a little much all the time that everything is at golden hour and everything just goes glistening when he's on the rocks, and it's always outside and there's always a natural breeze, and the beach scenes, which all are beautiful and they're extremely well shot, but they seem in contradiction to the reality of a superhero movie. I think it's supposed to base it in reality or make it reality for whatever that is. But then you have these extremely CGI deviants, bad guys, and it just seems weird seeing this CGI character coming out of water, which is real, and or maybe not, and then being on a beach that has a sunset behind it. It's just, it didn't seem to, it's beautiful, and I love her style, and I was all about Nomadland, and I'm all about Chloe
Mhm.
Zhao. Don't get me wrong, no disrespect, but did it add to the sensibility of the film? Did it add to the texture of the film? I'm not so sure. Most of the Eternals costumes were very muted colors. Even though the blue was a brighter blue and the green was a brighter green, it seemed much more naturalistic green and much more. And then Thena's is all white, and then Druig is all black, and they're very stark colors and basic, simple colors, realistic colors. So with the realistic sunsets and the backdrops and the golden hours and the rocks and the leaves and the trees, it's like it was beautiful to look at, but I just thought to myself, I need to see him fly and shoot lasers out of his eyes. Do I need to see him do that as the sun's setting over Malibu? Maybe not. So I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, does
So you're saying it was kind of like, well, first of all, it was different than any other superhero movie you've ever seen. So like whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to the viewer. But do you think that it's trying to make it in a more lived in space and less fantastical, and that may be
well,
the
if it
issue?
is, then why are we doing that about people who come from the universe, not from Earth? They're not grounded in golden hour. They're
Yeah.
coming from space.
Yeah,
And
but they
there's
still
not.
have, it's weird though, because they still have emotions. They still have the same types of emotions. They have sex the same way that,
Oh,
that
by the way,
people have sex.
did we not just talk about last week how sex scenes are no longer in movies? And boom,
There you
we
go.
there it is.
In a Marvel movie. And I think that's a PG-13 movie because of, but I don't think did anybody drop the F-bomb? I don't think they did, but that's another reason why you would have a PG-13 movie. Well, most of their movies are PG-13, but it's probably for violence. I don't know if this was technically PG-13 for sexual proclivities,
Naked
but still,
shoulders. I mean, you
yeah, I
don't.
mean, it was an interesting addition because you can infer in many, many other Marvel movies that different people get it on, and you don't need a beach sex scene. But in this one, they felt like they should add that in there.
Well, that brings me to my next point. Was it necessary? I don't have a problem with sex scenes. I love sex scenes. I beautiful people looking beautiful in HD. I love it. Okay, and they're beautiful, both of them. But we already know they're in love. We already
Yeah.
know they've established that they're in love. So usually when you see people getting it on, that shows you how much they're in love with each other. And then the beautiful sunset and blah blah. Sorry, I'm not making fun of it. I'm just perplexed by it because by that point we know they're in love. So I don't understand why we needed all that.
Well, but at that point, we already know that they've been broken up.
Right.
Like, and so it's putting us in a weird spot too. It's kind of like, all right, so they're broken up in present day, but then now we're watching them court each other and then, have sex on the beach and then ultimately 1,000 years later get married, I guess. Talk about a long engagement. I mean, that's a pretty long engagement. But yeah, and then something quote unquote something happens to allow them to separate or to prevent them from staying together, and we find out what that is. Like, I mean, these are all screenwriting signposts that get paid off, and it makes sense as to why they wrote it and how they wrote it and why they teased it and what they did. But I don't know why I'm missing something, and that maybe it's because they're not human or superhero humans. They're these other things. I don't know.
It just dawned on me when you were talking about that they're trying to hang their coat on so many coat racks. So I think that the past history of that relationship is supposed to ground the film like Chris Pratt grounds the film by doing his little dance in the beginning. That
Yeah.
makes it human. That makes us it makes it relatable. We know what this guy's about just by that. And it's even funnier later on when you see the flashbacks or the flash forward or whatever you call it in
Yeah, in Endgame.
where you don't hear the music, which is brilliant. It's so great. That is really brilliant. That's a great choice. Whoever thought of that is that just solidifies everything. So,
Mm.
so is it about what's the celestial's name?
Start Erisham.
Erisham. That's right, Erisham. The beginning of the movie, you think that that's what they're hanging their coat on. That storyline, Ajax, and how that all pans out. Then it turns into the interview with a vampire, I'm never going to grow up thing, but now it's Sprite. So are they hanging their head on a young person who can never grow up? Are they hanging their head on a new relationship with another Game of Thrones guy? What are they hanging their coat on? So I think they're trying to ground the movie with this love story, and it could have worked if there wasn't all of these other offshoots that didn't directly relate back to that. And with Ajax and how she interacts with the big guy, they could have hung their coats on that instead of everything else that happened. But that brings me to another thing that I question about movies that spend all this time to do all these complicated plot lines, and then they establish these rules, but they immediately break them. No one's ever been killed in 7,000 years. The Eternals, no Eternal, and then in less than 2 hours, 2 of them die. And it's like, wait, what's the rule? Is the rule that nobody died for 7,000 years? Then why in one movie did 2 of them die?
Not so eternal anymore.
Right.
What are the stakes? That's what I was saying earlier. Like, what are the stakes? Like, when these people are battling these deviants, like, should I be worried for the Eternals, or should I be worried for all of the people that the Eternals are trying to save? Obviously, I should be worried for those people, but like, should I also be worried for the Eternals, or is this just like a thing they do before they go get a beer later on? Save all of the people in Mesopotamia, and then they go out and like have a good time that night. Like, I don't know.
Well, speaking of which, and I don't know why this jumped out at me, but I was like, wait a second, that you just literally established that rule and then you just broke it. So he's building a steam engine and saying, this is the next thing I'm going to bring to this. And Sprite says, that's going to freak him out. Then she's seen throwing sparks in theater out of her fingers, but that doesn't freak them out. And their costumes don't freak them out. And these powers that these people have don't freak them out. These beautiful people in these great costumes don't freak them out. So why would a steam engine freak them out? I mean, like literally the next scene is her telling the story and she's recreating it. Obviously, these screenwriters know what they're doing to a degree, but it just didn't make sense how one thing would freak them out, but then this wouldn't. So why not show her creating cave paintings with her powers, zoom in on all the gold and then it melts down to regular colors, just like glass does when you blow it. It becomes, depending on what chemical you introduce, it becomes a different color. So then do that and then say blah, blah, blah in the foreign language that, the different language that they were speaking, and have them, she can put a little light to it or a little extra flame to it so they can read the cave paintings, because this doesn't make any sense. I was like, I don't get it.
That's one of the other issues that I had is that, I mean, they're trying to deal with how they interact with the humans, whether it's the amount of technology that they give to the humans, like whether it's, Phastos giving them a plow versus giving them a steam engine, and how, well, pretty much like, what does Druig do? Like, what is he supposed to do? Because it seems like there's the only times when he is interacting with the humans, he's got people like reeling him in every single time. It's like, you have the ability to control humans, but then don't control humans because that's not what we're supposed to do. He's pretty much like saying like, you guys gave me these powers and now you don't want me to use them at all. So where do I fit in all this stuff? Now, I think in the comic books, he's kind of like a bad Eternal maybe, or they're always kind of like trying to, it's a precedent in the comic books, I guess. But at the same time, it seems confusing as to because like, can he control deviants? Because if he can, like, do that. You're an Eternal. You're trying to get these deviants to stop killing people. So control the deviants. But there's the powers that they've been given sometimes seem a little confusing. The Makari character, played by Lauren Ridloff, like that's a perfect superpower or a perfect power to be used in battle and for gaining knowledge of things going on around the earth and all that stuff. That is a perfectly useful power. And the Gilgamesh power, all of the powers that pretty much everybody else has, makes sense. Athena and Icarus, and really Cersei, the one that they chose to lead everybody, her power is kind of, I mean, it's beneficial to a certain extent, but it's she can only do so much when it comes down to it. She has to be able to touch things. And so that makes things, and later on in the movie, more risky and heightens the tension. And we're also evaluating these characters with a 2021 lens instead of, going back and being like, well, when these were written, it was what, like 1960 or something?
I think 1976, if I remember correctly, because I remember reading that and thinking how old I was at that time.
Yeah, so that right there is, I mean, it's a totally different kind of setup here. And so comic books are notoriously loose with their origins and what happens. And, oh, if you don't like that, we'll just restart it. We'll reboot it. We'll, change it up. We've got another writer, another artist will completely, mix things up. So there's really not as many like hard and fast rules with comic books, but we're now 24, 25 movies into this Marvel Cinematic Universe, and there are definitely very strict rules that have been followed up to this point. So maybe for lack of a better word, sloppiness of the story, it's incongruous with some stuff that's happened in the past. I think this movie is trying to set up a bunch of other things that will be going on in the future. We haven't talked about the post-credit sequences, but it teases both the Black Knight character and Blade. So that's, and also Star Fox. When we were watching older MCU movies and seeing post-credit scenes and being like, who's that? What's this? We were just like, what? That's never going to work. Or what? I don't know what people were saying back then, but pretty much like, saying that this seems weird, but it all ended up working out. I mean, Thanos was in the post-credit scene of the first Avengers. People are like, what's that? That guy looks weird. Why is his chin all wrinkly? And then he's Thanos. And everybody knows him. So, I mean, I'm not saying that they can't do it. I'm just saying that we've already seen this thing happen. And they're trying to do it again. So it's going to be a lot harder the second time. So,
yeah, I'm still a little perplexed is kind of strong, but I'm still questioning, why did they need so many of the Eternals? Like, were there always 10 in the comic book? Is there a reason for 10? If so, then give us a reason. And you've kind of debunked some of the reasons to have some of the characters. That said, the more positive way, not that you were negative, but I'm saying the more positive way to look at things is that it is good that Cersei is the lead character at the end of the movie, that it is somebody you're not traditionally thinking is going to be taking the helm, and that the person that you
and
think
she may have been the only one that had the capability of freezing the baby Celestial. I don't know.
I just thought about diapering and giving the bottle to the baby. So that, and the fact that you think that Icarus will be the lead, and they're expecting him to be the lead, and he turns out to not be. Not such a shock by the end of the film, because you have been through so many bait and switching in this film that it's not that much of a surprise. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I think you're supposed to kind of relate to him that he's doing the right thing anyway. And that was an interesting debate, whether or not we thought them putting the baby back to sleep or freezing the baby, that was a good thing because it saved Earth. But yet when it's explained that this is how the universe expands, then is that a good thing? And do they have the powers to do that? So the interesting thing is that Cersei is, or becomes, the lead character, or the character that ends up doing the right thing, when you're expecting it to be Angelina Jolie, who is a supporting character in a movie, which you don't see often from her. And it was great. She was great. It was great to see her in the background and doing her thing anyway. And they do lean heavy on her character later on in the film. And it's an interesting subplot. I like that. And I like the fact that they are a family and that he's taking care of her. And even though she's got some thing in her now.
It's PTSD. I mean, it's the allegory is that it's PTSD. It's something that's happened in her past that is coming back up, and it's affecting her in a certain way that is driving her to stop the Eternals from doing what they're supposed to do, because she knew her previous self disagreed with what the Eternals did, and so now she's trying to prevent them from doing that same thing again. I
See, I
mean,
got all that when I saw the film, but it
yeah.
does it does take a lot to take it in.
Mm.
I was going to say it's taxing, but that's too strong of a word too. I can't put my finger on it because I did enjoy watching this movie. I did have a good time, and I'm glad that they
I
did certain things. It just they needed to simplify, introduce these characters as if they were going to make a second Eternal movie, but make this movie all encompassing. It's 2 hours and 36 minutes. That's lengthier than some films, but you're right. I don't think it seemed long, but why not spend 2 hours and 15 minutes on establishing another universe? And that would be fine. I don't know why anybody would run scared from that because it is a whole nother universe, if you will, meaning these characters and where they're from and all that other stuff. So why not have them learn that fact at the end of the film? Why not have just them fighting the deviants? Why not making the deviants be able to, after 7,000 years or however long they've been on the earth, transform into humanoid-esque characters like the one does in this film? Because from Wikipedia, the deviants don't look anything like that. They look like humans. They look like bad guys who are comic book characters, and which would have been a lot to introduce at one time. So why not take us back to when they first showed up? And why go right up to the blip? Go right up to it. Everything doesn't need to be post blip. It just doesn't. And there's no reason. And they're getting ready to mess all that up anyway with the new Spider-Man movie and all the
Yeah.
multi-universe stuff that they're coming into
Yeah.
place.
Well, and the
So,
Doctor Strange movie, same thing. Both of those movies are going to really kind of split this thing apart.
right. So why not
And
just make
yeah.
this just its own thing? And I don't know have the answers to the question. You were talking about expectations and what we've been used to for 25 movies, and what you thought that kind of allowed this movie to not gel as well because it established rules and it had to stick to established rules. But why did it? It didn't need to. And also, I would like to have been in the room where they they chose Chloe Zhao, because I would like to hear why they thought what she has would bring something to this film, because I think she does and I think it does, but it's too much. It's too much CGI. It's too much special effects. It's too much. So if they simplified and we just went to Mesopotamia or flash back to that time and when people are cutting off people's heads and throwing them over those the human sacrifice places, then you could have Druig having a problem with not being able to control human nature because they're killing each other. They're chopping off each other's heads to celebrate to gods that don't exist. I got to control this. That could be that conflict, which is essentially what the conflict is in this film, but then it just goes nowhere. So it's just so many things. And I think they did well at making those things, although those things make sense in 2.5 hours, but I don't think they needed all of that. It would have been so much, it would have been beautiful if the scenery was used just in a few scenes instead of every single time there's someone new. It's something, everything sparkles. And that's beautiful. And I love it.
So the movie looked too good for you.
I don't understand that style and what it brought to the film because I'm so concerned with everything else that's going on that why does Ajak look like that when she dies? I was more interested in how they got Salma Hayek to look like that. Was that computer generated? Was that prosthetics? Was that makeup? What was it? I was thinking about that instead of like her actually dying.
I think that's why so many Marvel scores are not memorable, is that there's so much other stuff, for me at least, there's so much other stuff on screen. It's just there, like a bunch of other stuff that's there. And you're saying that maybe from what I'm hearing is that you're saying that a lot of the cinematographical choices they had that they decided to do that didn't necessarily heighten the film. It just was another thing to take in along with all the plot and the character development or lack thereof or whatever else is going on. So as far as Chloe Zhao is concerned, from what I've read, she was brought in and she was brought in to talk about directing Black Widow. And when she was in that meeting, she kind of said that she didn't want to do Black Widow, but she did want to do Eternals. And she had like a whole pitch for Eternals, this huge story arc situation for Eternals. And when Kevin Feige and the other people at Marvel Studios heard that, they were like, this is not what we were expecting. This is not what we were planning on, but this is interesting. And she ended up getting that job. And then Kate Shortland ended up getting the Black Widow directing job. So I don't know how specific that is or how true that is, but that's what I've read in multiple places.
I feel kind of bad because I think I'm bashing on this film a lot more than I expected. I actually enjoyed the experience, and I feel bad that I'm going back and forth from all the things that I question and all the things that I don't understand to really liking certain things. But actually, that's kind of the film. That's kind of the experience that I had. I like I said in the beginning of the podcast, I did think about it, and I wasn't purposely trying to poke holes into it, but they didn't come easily. I was like, okay, well, that makes sense that they did this. That makes sense that they did that. I was happy to watch it. I had a good experience watching it. I will watch it again, and I think it might turn out to be, maybe after understanding more things about it, that it will connect better for me. But the other side to that is that, should that have happened the first time you saw the film? You know what I mean? Like, does it take? But that said, there's plenty of music out there that on first listen, I'm like, okay. And then it gets in you. And then 4 or 5 listens later, you're like, this is the best song ever. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's our ear. I've noticed that in theater too. The first 10 or 15 minutes of play always sounds fake to me. And it's because, and we've talked about this, and it's not because they're doing anything different on stage. It's that my ear hasn't adjusted to what they want it adjusted to. And I think that's why Shakespeare is not as popular in this country as it is in other countries, because our ears want that language to adjust to us when we need to adjust to that. And maybe that's what this is. Maybe I'm not adjusting to what she wanted from this film, because I can feel that there's greatness there, but it does also kind of just hum. It has this hum instead of singing. It doesn't ever reach out and just grab you.
Well, and I am thinking about this with you and saying, like, why is it that I'm more than willing to watch Tenet 4 and 5 times and get more out of it every single time, whereas, you know, that with this movie, I'm kind of like, I felt like I got everything I should have gotten out of it, and then, you know, I'm gonna move on. But maybe after seeing other movies that are of the subsequent movies in the MCU, maybe going back to this, the other things will make sense, or they're having to spend a certain amount of time teasing certain characters or teasing certain images or teasing certain scenarios or laying the groundwork for something that's going to happen in the future, then that all having to be shoved into the same movie that's supposed to introduce us to characters, show us that the characters are going through something that is traumatic, and then figuring out how many characters are going to live by the end and kill the bad guy. That's a lot, and I should be just as willing to revisit the movie as I am a movie that's more puzzle boxy like Tenet. Well, I will say that I'm glad that Kumail Nanjiani's in this movie, because I've been a huge fan of his as a stand-up comedian, and then we even talked about his movie The Big Sick that he co-wrote with his wife Emily Gordon and starred in. And so, yeah, I think that now that he's in a Marvel movie, more people will see him, and hopefully they will Google him and seek him out and see his funny stand-up. And I think he produced a show called Little America, I think, on Apple TV, which I have not watched yet, but He was in the new Twilight Zone, the Jordan Peele produced Twilight Zone. He's been in a few things, but yeah, I think that it's good to to get him out there and get more people to see him, and so I'm excited about that.
I do love the fact that there is a very diverse cast and it's becoming second nature, which is great. You never think twice about why I cast her instead of him or blah, blah, blah. First gay kiss in a movie, that's a great thing. And it's done
In an
naturally.
MCU movie, right?
In an MCU movie. Oh, yeah. Wouldn't that be like amazing?
That'd be a little.
2021, guys do kiss. Yeah, it's handled really beautifully. It's about a relationship and it's about a father-son relationship, and that scene is shot extremely well, and it's beautiful, and it is just part of being a human. And even though
which he's not.
Even though he's an eternal, but he's chosen to live his life as a human being. So all of that's a beautiful thing, and I think that there's really great stuff here, and I'm looking forward to exploring it further.
Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can tweet us at actorengineer, and you can find us on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. And we are also on YouTube. Just search for the Actor and the Engineer podcast, and we'll see you next time.